It's often easier to fool people than it is to show them that they've been fooled. But nonetheless, I'm going to keep telling the truth until it starts to penetrate the minds of our people. I'm going to tell the truth whether it fills the room or clears it out. Because I'm here to awaken the sleeping sheep, not to entertain the blind goats. Here's a fact. Those who insist that Black people are being controlled by the Willie Lynch slave syndrome does so because they're ignorant. Whenever people are ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense. To believe that the Willie Lynch myth is true, people would in fact have to be ignorant of how true brainwashing is actually achieved. Because the Willie Lynch myth presents what would in fact be the least effective and least plausible method used for controlling generations of millions of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing works. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied and reinforced upon the minds of the targeted populations in order to remain effective. If not, its brainwashing effects would lessen with each new generation instead of worsening as we've witnessed among our own people. Case in point, during the 1960s, African Americans implemented the most successful unified protests in U.S. history. Today, African Americans are now more divided than any previous time in U.S. history. During the 1960s, we unifiedly call ourselves brothers and sisters. Today, we dividedly call ourselves niggers and bitches. We've worsened since the 1960s. If our current collective condition was truly connected to slavery, it would have logically lessened as each new generation moved further away from the era of slavery, instead of worsening as it has. The fact that we've worsened since the 1960s is proof that our collective condition is not connected to a silly slave syndrome. People usually have a right to believe whatever they choose to believe. But that's a luxury that the oppressed doesn't have. The oppressed must gain a clear and accurate understanding of our plight and condition in order to liberate ourselves. Because if our understandings remains flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stem from those flawed understandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach the truth, regardless of who it offends. As African proverbs say, a speaker of truth has no friends. The truth must prevail. Now here's the truth. There are 4 ways to brainwash millions of people to think as you want them to. By what they're taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, and the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, they've secretly exploited these factors to manipulate the collective minds of Black people to think in ways that are against their own interests and that instead serve the interests of their white society. The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. If it's possible to control the input into the human mind, it is entirely possible to control what people will think. The white society exploits its monopoly over information that Black people systematically receive to subliminally shapes our minds to think in ways benefiting their white society. More specifically, they've subliminally indoctrinated self-contemptuous thoughts into the collective minds of the Black masses that are designed to keep Black collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected towards and against ourselves. This is the truth of our plighted condition. Keeping us within this condition prevents our ability to unify against the white oppressive society. It's how the white society protects itself from massive, unified Black retribution. Welcome to the real damn world. The subliminal manipulation of the subconscious minds of large targeted population is not a conspiracy theory. It's a true hidden social science that allows governments and the ruling class to control the masses and targeted populations. It is a discipline in the social science that refers to efforts to influence particular attitudes and social behaviors on a large scale in order to produce desired characteristics within a targeted population. The hypothesis behind this social engineering tactic is that if the societal information given to a targeted population can be controlled, then that population's beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors can also be controlled. People are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an implied objective. It's the true reason why many Black people now perceive ourselves as being our worst enemies and reveres Caucasians in spite of a brutally horrific history of the contrary. Black people are, in fact, the unknowing victims of the most elaborately deployed, demoralized, divide and rule psychological warfare campaign in world history. Demoralizing divide and rule is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization. It's the true reason why all Black narratives from the white society are Black racially demoralizing. The ultimate goal is to demoralize Black people to such an extent that we begin to doubt our own ability to govern ourselves and believe that we therefore need white people to govern over our lives. Moreover, that we're better off living under white dominance, and therefore we abandon all hopes of ever liberating ourselves. It also creates Black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. This is our reality. Sadly, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent words about themselves. Francis Fanon said that. Some Black people have been so heavily demoralized by the white society's false depiction of us as a people that they literally find it easier to continue believing the fraudulent worst of ourselves than to accept the fact that we're being lied to keep us demoralized, divided, and self-loathing as a means of preventing us from unifying against the white society. If you're doubting this disclosure, it's because you're not critically thinking. Some things are so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking that it cannot be seen. For when critically thinking, can't you see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually in fact is that virtually all information that we receive from the white society about us are consistently negative and Black racially demoralizing? And when I say everything, I do mean everything. While withholding most Black racially affirming facts from us during our entire education and development, they miseducate us to believe that our history started with slavery because we had no significant history that predates the white society enslavement of us, which is a lie. They tell us that we scored the lowest on all test scores, therefore we're the dumbest. They tell us that we have the most health problems, therefore we're the sickest. They tell us that we kill each other at the highest rate. They tell us that Black fathers are the worst, that Black husbands are the worst, that Black women are lesser supported than white women. Everything is negative. They tell us that Black students are the most disruptive. And they keep telling us that we're always within some type of crisis and therefore we need them to rescue us. There are presently millions of African American senior citizens that have never once in their entire life ever heard a positive narrative ever stated about us from the white society. Everything that the white society says about Black people are consistently negative and Black racially demoralizing. Critically think. Can I see how cartoonishly unrealistic it is? We've normalized it. It's a Black racially demoralizing and unrules psychological warfare system that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over Black people. Because people function based upon what they're made to believe about themselves. It's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a process through which an original false narrative leads to its own confirmation. In a self-fulfilling prophecy, people start acting based upon the false narrative about themselves, thus making it real. People's belief influence their actions. Like, for example, they've made us believe that we're our own worst enemies. So when we see another black person walking at night, we tense up and we start mean mugging him. We're functioning based upon the false narrative. We function based upon what they make us believe about ourselves. Isn't this their greatest weapon against us? This then creates an illusory truth effect upon black people when we start acting based upon everything and we start insisting that we see it that is true, all their narrative is not. The illusory truth effect is when people have been made to believe that false information is true because of being constantly subjected to the false information. And they then begin functioning based upon that false information rather than what's true. And then they start insisting that they see for themselves that it's true, although they are not. People are easily controlled by the information they routinely receive about themselves. When people routinely receive positive, affirming information about themselves, this unifies them and uplifts them. However, when people constantly receive negative, demoralizing information about themselves, the exact opposite happens. This makes them self-hating, self-doubting, it divides them. And guess this, it also makes them more compliant with their oppressor's dominance over their lives. This demoralization process is precisely what's being done to black people. Here's a basic example of how it works. It's an analogy, okay? It'll help you understand. Imagine that a crew of people were out at sea aboard their own massive, well-functioning ship, and that it was being followed by another ship. A following ship that was constantly broadcasting derogatory messages to the first crew. Such messages telling the first crew that their ship was lesser, smaller, not seaworthy, perhaps slowly sinking, or that their crew was incompetent, or they were planning a mutiny. With time, the crew constantly receiving a negative message about themselves, being unable to refute or to confirm these negative messages and deficiencies, they will grow weary and paranoid, and they will eventually come to accept the negative information told about themselves. This will then cause them to become distrustful of each other, self-doubting each other, resenting each other, hating each other, and eventually easily fighting among each other. The taunted group may even become so besieged with feelings of inadequacy and resentment towards their own people that some will jump off of the ship and try to swim toward the taunting ship, believing that the taunting ship is superior when their, in fact, ship was actually the better one. The entire process was accomplished by merely constantly inundating the ship's crew with fraudulent, negative, demoralizing information about themselves. The weapon he used was the demoralizing message that was sent. No group can be told everything negative about themselves and not be adversely affected. It's not possible. The two ship at sea analogy is an example of how the white society controls black people through demoralization. The white society's monopoly over black people's narrative allows them to indoctrinate self-contemptuous thoughts into the collective minds of black people. Within a real setting, this demoralization process is being done to black people unrelentingly through propaganda campaigns. Through the white media propaganda campaigns. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that amplifies the negative to such a point that it literally distorts our reality is so much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually a black racially demoralizing and rural psychological warfare program. Because white people controls all black statistics, narratives, and they even control our media images. These factors allows the white society to easily negatively shape black people's perception of ourselves collectively. More specifically, this allows them to embed self-contemptuous thoughts into the collective minds of black people. It's how white propagandists shifted black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. It's the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as our own worst enemies, and revere and defend Caucasians, in spite of such a horrific, brutal history of racism, discrimination, murder. We have been programmed. If you don't think that the reason why many black people are now thinking exactly as the white society wants us to think is an outcome created by the white society, you are extremely naive. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to do. And it's not a damn slave syndrome. Black people have been subliminally manipulated to think and behave in ways that serve and protect the white society. Black people who speaks negatively about our race does so based upon information that comes from white people. A 100% fact is that all information that we receive about black people comes exclusively and unilaterally from white people. Wake up and critically think. The group that has never actually earned the credibility to exclusively control our narratives are the ones that are doing so. Think about that fact. They've been telling negative lies about black people for over 400 years. It's what they've always done. It's the way they are, and it's the only way they know how to be. But they brainwash our black people not to recognize what's really happening. So we blindly accept them. We're hating our own people based upon information from them. Don't be fooled. If Caucasians were truly superior, they wouldn't have to work this hard behind the scene to manipulate and handicap those who they claim are inferior. Your entire perception of reality is an elaborate white deception. And there are people who working behind the scene to keep your mind dumbed down. They have you looking your Bible, they keep your mind dumbed down. They got you thinking it's Willie Lynch, your mind has been dumbed down. Those of us who are telling you the truth are trying to free you from mental prison. You don't even know you're trapped within. So often people think they have knowledge. I got knowledge, I have knowledge. Jesus. Listen, I know I said as a reaction. The worst enemy of the oppressed is not an ignorant mind. It is an ignorant mind that holds on to false knowledge. Because an ignorant mind by itself might seek the truth, but an ignorant mind with false knowledge holds on to it thinking he's found the truth and stays mentally enslaved by the false knowledge. The Bible is false knowledge. Willie Lynch is false knowledge. There are social sciences that the white society deploys. By deploying social sciences, it provides the white society with a more covert method used for subjugating black people. During the 1960s, they also determined that an aggravating factor for that year's unprecedented black protests was blatant white racism. So they abandoned the blatant white racism, and now they do it covertly. They subjugate us covertly. This is what black people don't even recognize, don't even understand it. And it's so clever. They're subjugating us while manipulating millions of us to insist that we're our worst enemies. It's time to wake up to our reality. The time of believing in dumb shit is over.